Were you afraid that day?
I was very afraid.
Are you afraid now? Going forward?
I am afraid because I know there's people that disagree with my actions on January the 6th. But I hope they understand I did my job. And there was imminent threats and danger to the members of Congress.
That was Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd, the man who shot and killed terrorist Ashli Babbitt on January 6th, revealing himself publicly for the first time during an interview yesterday with NBC's Lester Holt. Byrd, a 28-year veteran of the Capitol Police Force, says he saved countless lives that day as he prevented rioters from reaching the House chamber, where he says he was protecting 60 to 80 House members and staff. Byrd has been in hiding since the insurrection after his name leaked on right-wing sites, resulting in racist remarks and death threats. Let's take a listen.
Can you give us the nature of some of those threats?
They talked about, killing me, cutting off my head, very vicious and cruel things.
Racist things?
There were some racist attacks as well. It's all disheartening because I know I was doing my job.
Given the nature of the threats that you describe, do you have any concern about showing your face and identifying yourself?
Of course I do. That is a very vital point, and it's something that is frightening. I believe I showed the utmost courage on January 6th, and it's time for me to do that now.
Joining our conversation is Dr. Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University and a politics editor at the Grio, and Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, NCE, host of the Bureau podcast, and an Embassy National Security Analyst. Dr. Greer, I'm going to start with you. There's a piece that I wrote several months ago talking about Eugene Goodman. He was the African-American officer who basically saved Mitt Romney's life by taunting terrorists and leading them away from the chamber. Now we've got Officer Byrd coming forward, talking about the danger that he was in and how he had to shoot Ashli Babbitt. I want you to talk a little bit about what is the significance of two of the most known heroes of this insurrection on January 6th being black men, and the unique dangers that they face in standing up to these groups that may not be the same for some of the white officers who are also defending Congress.
Right. Thank you, Jason. I mean, full stop, we know that January 6th had racist undertones and overtones. The president of the United States at the time ginned up his base to then go overthrow the Capitol. And we saw the swastikas there. We saw the Confederate flags. We know that many of those people, if not the vast majority of those people, believe that America should be for a certain type of white individual, not for immigrants and definitely not for people of color and people of African descent. And so when we think about how black people have defended this country, not just on January 6th, but from the beginning of our history, when we think about all the wars we've had, when we think about police officers who've been killed by their colleagues, black police officers, when we think about black officers returning from World Wars I and II and being lynched in their uniforms, we know that there is a disconnect with how this country sees black law enforcement and black police officers and black military personnel, male and female, and the level of respect that they've failed to receive over decades. And so when we think about officers Robinson and sort of all the other actually black officers that day, they had a dual job that day. Was not just to protect the American people and protect the Capitol, but also to try and protect themselves. We can see from the horrific footage, the people who stormed the Capitol were out for blood, not just for Mitt Romney and Vice President Pence, but definitely African Americans. And to do that in Washington, D.C., a majority black city, says a lot. And so these two black officers who risked their lives literally to save American democracy should not go into the dustbin of history. And until we actually face the facts, the real facts of what happened on January 6th and the racist undertones and overtones, we can't move forward as a nation. And so many Republican elected officials should be ashamed of themselves for trying to make it seem as though it was just a little bit of a parade that got a teeny bit unruly. That is absolutely not what it was. It cannot go into the history books as such.
Eugene Goodman, Michael Byrd. These are African Americans who put their lives on the line to keep this country safe and yet still can't seem to get protection for the right to vote. Frank Figliuzzi, I want to bring up an interesting sort of part of that conversation. It's a tear from NBC. Officer Byrd talked about the fact that he did not know if Ashli Babbitt was armed or not, but he still felt like he needed to do his job. Now, look, I'm not an expert, I'm not an officer, I'm not the FBI, so I'm deferring to you on this. But to me, if you're that far in the building at that point, you are a threat. And it seemed reasonable to me that he could use whatever force was available. But, you know, from a security standpoint and a safety standpoint, was he justified in using lethal force even if he didn't know that Ashli Babbitt was armed?
Well, we don't have to take your layman's opinion on this. We can look toward the 3 separate investigations that have been done, including Department of Justice civil rights investigation, including U.S. Capitol Police internal affairs investigation. And all of these investigations have found that he was well within the deadly force policy. What do most deadly force policies for police departments say? An officer needs to be in reasonable fear of imminent death or serious bodily harm to himself or others. That, in my opinion, and I have led during a portion of my career as chief inspector in the FBI, I led all use of force shooting inquiries within the FBI. I would have come to this same conclusion. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm monitoring law enforcement forums where law enforcement hang out, even law enforcement executives. And here's what I'm saying and hearing in terms of this. They're saying in any other police department, this officer would have been fired or found to be outside the scope of the policy for deadly force. And then here's the problem. When someone comes back and says to them, have you seen all of the video from inside that building? Have you listened to the radio traffic that Lieutenant Byrd was hearing then with regard to officers down, officers assaulted, people wanting to kill Nancy Pelosi, the screams that he was hearing from the other side of that door coming at him? He was that thin blue line that day. And when that window in that door crashed and he had 60 to 80 Congress members and staff behind him, he was that guy between the murderous crowd and those protectees. When you ask them that question, you often get the answer, well, I haven't listened to all of that. So, you know, if you think it's an unreasonable use of force, it's probably because you're ignoring the available facts, the radio traffic, and the testimony of police from inside that building. And the other aspect to this that I'm seeing on forums, particularly extremist forums, is the racial aspect of this. Many, many commentators there saying if this was a white officer who shot a Black Lives Matter protester, he would be arrested. And of course, this is not an equal, this is apples and oranges. The facts aren't the same there, right? And so there is no other police department like the Capitol Police who protect literally our democratic process. He was within his policy. He did do the right thing. And his coming out to speak about it, I view as a second act of heroism for Lieutenant Byrd.
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that Botham Jean is a black man who can get shot in his home, Atiana Jefferson could be shot in her home playing video games, it seems pretty clear to me that black people can be shot regardless of what they happen to be doing. But Frank, I also think there's something key about this. Given the large number of people who were part of that insurrection, who were also either former or current law enforcement or military people, talk about how that creates an increased danger for somebody like Officer Byrd coming forward, because the people who are coming after him aren't just your angry people on the streets. Some of these people might be trained officers. They actually know how to track somebody down and harm them.
There's no question that there is chatter right now as we speak about bringing harm to Lieutenant Byrd, people calling him the most vile names, people trying to figure out where he is. He is a hero, not a target. And I have to assume and hope that he has taken precautions for his own security, his family's security. But he's doing the right thing. You know, it's a funny thing about truth and facts. They're like sunshine. You can only block them out for so long. They want to shine. And he needs to get this truth out so people can hear it.
Dr. Greer, you know, Frank has mentioned several times that he's paying attention to the chatter online, the communication. The January 6th committee has subpoenaed a lot of logs from social media. They're going after 4chan and 8kun and Facebook and Gab and Google, I'm pretty sure Tinder and Grindr are on there somewhere. Clearly these are places where people were connecting in order to prepare, discuss, and justify their behavior. What do you think the January 6th Commission could get out of this? I mean, some of it's obviously going to be a lot of people talking, but from a political standpoint, an investigative standpoint, what do you think they might be able to get off of Google or some chat line about the January 6th insurrectionists?
Well, Jason, we know that many people, on these dating apps have actually been able to assist the FBI because so many of these men who stormed the Capitol are bragging about it when they're trying to get a date. I think the January 6th Commission needs to do several things. One, and this is a priority for me, find out actually how many Republican members of Congress actually knew that this was happening and whether or not they were communicating with people who were inside the Capitol. I think that actually is something that we must get to the bottom of. And in addition to not just the law enforcement officers who were there, I'm actually concerned with the number of educators who were in that crowd as well. I mean, these are people who are with our children day in and day out, and they're willing to threaten not just the lives of Capitol police officers, but our democracy writ large. I'm also hoping that the January 6th Commission can make sure that, I don't know if Republicans could hear that this is an American issue that we need to get to the bottom of. It absolutely should not be partisan. It should not be seen as a Democratic witch hunt. We should really care about what happened for the future of this Democratic Republic.
If you're a terrorist on a dating app, you want to be out here, you don't really want to be out here. You think you want to be out here in a dating app, but you don't. Dr. Christina Greer and Frank Figliuzzi, thank you so much for your time today on Deadline White House.